In 1900, the American sausage was a mystery wrapped in an intestine. Millions of pounds were consumed every year, but almost no one knew how they were truly made. Behind the doors of the great meatpacking plants, a process was unfolding that the industry desperately wanted to keep hidden. What went into those casings would horrify the public for generations. This is the story of how sausages were made in 1900, the process no one talks about.
Chicago, 1900. The city had earned a grim nickname, Hog Butcher for the World. In a sprawling district known as Packingtown, the American meatpacking industry had concentrated its power. Acres upon acres of stockyards, feedlots, slaughterhouses, and processing plants stretched across the landscape. The smell was unbearable, a mixture of blood, animal waste, and decay that could be detected from miles away. Every year, 3 million cattle and 5 million hogs arrived by rail, and almost none left alive. This was the industrial heart of America's meat supply, and it operated with a singular philosophy. Nothing was wasted, and no one asked questions. The workers who made the sausages were not born Americans. They were immigrants, desperate souls who had crossed oceans seeking a better life. Poles, Lithuanians, Slovaks, Germans, and Bohemians poured into Packingtown by the thousands. They lived in cramped tenements next to the stinking stockyards, surrounded by 4 city dumps. Most spoke little English. They worked 10 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, for pennies per hour. Women and children as young as 14 labored in the sausage rooms, trimming meat, stuffing casings, and canning products. They had no unions, no protections, and no voice. They were, as one writer called them, the wage slaves of the beef trust.
Before a sausage could be made, an animal had to die. The killing floor was the first stop in the meatpacking process, a place of systematic slaughter that operated like a factory assembly line, except in reverse. Hogs were driven up ramps, shackled by their hind legs and hoisted onto overhead rails. A sticker would slit each throat in one swift motion. Blood poured onto the floor in rivers, draining into troughs below. The carcasses moved down the line, still twitching, to be scalded, scraped, gutted, and split. Men stood all day in pools of blood and offal, wielding sledgehammers and knives. The work was relentless. One plant could process 7,000 hogs in a single day. The sausage had a purpose beyond nutrition. It was a way to make the unsellable sellable. In the meatpacking industry of 1900, there was a saying, when meat was too spoiled to sell any other way, it was either canned or chopped into sausage. The grinding process destroyed all evidence. A rotten ham, a diseased cow, a contaminated pig, once it passed through the grinder, no customer could tell what they were eating. The sausage was not just a product, it was a hiding place. It concealed the sins of an industry that prioritized profit over public health, and it did so with remarkable efficiency. The sausage room received meat from every corner of the plant, and not all of it arrived on a cart. Scraps that had fallen onto the floor where workers had tramped and spit were shoveled up and tossed into the grinder. Sawdust, dirt, and debris came along for the ride. The floors themselves were rarely washed. They remained damp and soggy, covered in blood, fat, and filth. In dark, poorly ventilated rooms, workers collected whatever meat they could find, regardless of where it had been. The philosophy was simple. If it could be ground, it could be sold, and no one on the outside would ever know the difference. The storage rooms where meat was piled were infested with rats, thousands of them. They raced across the mounds of pork and beef, leaving behind droppings that workers could sweep off by the handful. The packers tried to control the population by setting out poisoned bread. The rats ate the bread and died, often right there on the meat piles. And when the time came to shovel the meat into the grinder, no one bothered to remove the dead rats. Poisoned bread, rat carcasses, and dried feces all went into the hoppers together. As one account stated, there were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. When a ham began to spoil, the meatpackers did not throw it away. They performed what they called a miracle of chemistry. First, they would rub the sour meat with baking soda to eliminate the smell. If that did not work, they would chop the ham into pieces and mix it with tons of other meat in high-speed grinders where the stench would disappear entirely. Hams that had gone so rotten that a man could hardly stand to be in the same room were injected with a special pickle solution, a process workers called giving them 30%. The result was meat that smelled fresh, looked fresh, and sold fresh. But it was anything but. Not all spoiled sausage stayed in America. Some of it was shipped to Europe, where it was rejected by foreign inspectors and sent back across the Atlantic. But the meatpackers did not accept the loss. When moldy, white sausages returned from overseas, workers would douse them with borax and glycerin, dump them back into the hoppers, and grind them into new sausages, this time destined for American tables. The reprocessed meat was sold as fresh product, with no indication that it had already been rejected once. The cycle of waste and reuse was endless, and the American consumer was the final destination for meat that no other country would accept. The hopper was the heart of the sausage operation, a large metal funnel that fed into the grinding machine. Workers shoveled meat into it constantly, and the grinder did the rest. But the hopper did not discriminate. Whatever went in came out as ground meat. Butt ends of smoked meat, scraps of corned beef, odds and ends from every corner of the plant, waste that had been sitting in barrels in the cellar for months. Every spring, those barrels were finally cleaned out, and their contents, dirt, rust, old nails, stale water, were dumped into the hopper along with fresh meat and sent out to the public's breakfast table. The outer skin of a sausage, the casing, was not made of plastic or paper. It was made of intestines. After a hog or sheep was slaughtered, workers removed the small intestines and prepared them for use. The process was supposed to involve flushing, scraping, and cleaning with water and salt. But in 1900, the cleaning was often incomplete. Studies found that casings still contained fecal residue, straw fragments, corn particles, and animal hairs. The intestines were turned inside out, soaked and scraped by hand or by primitive machines. Workers stood in rooms reeking of decay, handling yards upon yards of animal gut. When they were finished, the casings were salted and stored until needed. The sausage stuffing room was a place of constant motion. Workers, many of them women and children, stood at long tables, feeding ground meat into mechanical stuffers. A casing was fitted onto a metal tube, and the machine forced the meat mixture through at high speed. One machine could stuff 10 feet of sausage per second.
The workers' hands were in constant contact with the meat, but there was no place to wash them. No gloves were worn. When workers needed to clean their hands before eating their lunch, they did so in the water that would later be added to the sausage mixture itself. The meat absorbed everything: sweat, dirt, and whatever the workers carried on their skin.
To keep sausages from spoiling, the meat packers turned to chemistry. Borax, a compound used to kill insects and clean laundry, was mixed into the meat as a preservative. So was formaldehyde, the same chemical used to embalm corpses. Salicylic acid, sodium sulfite, and other industrial compounds were added to extend shelf life and mask the smell of decay. The industry called these embalmed meats, and they proudly defended the practice. One manufacturer declared that everyone eats embalmed meat, and they love it. But the preservatives caused nausea, headaches, and digestive problems. Children who drank formaldehyde-preserved milk sometimes died, and no law required the packers to disclose what they were adding.
Fresh sausage had a particular color, a reddish pink that consumers associated with quality. But spoiled or chemically treated meat often lost that appealing hue. The solution was artificial coloring. Workers in the chemistry department would add gelatin and dyes to make pale, gray sausage look brown and appetizing. Some manufacturers used coal tar dyes, the same industrial compounds used to color fabrics. Others used vegetable dyes or mineral pigments. The goal was simple: make the sausage look like something customers would want to buy. The actual quality of the meat inside was irrelevant. All sausages came from the same hopper, but when they were wrapped, some were stamped special and sold for 2 cents more per pound.
The people who made the sausages paid with their bodies. Workers in the pickle rooms, who handled cold, brined meat all day, developed a condition called pickled hands. Their skin turned red, hardened, and cracked open, sometimes all the way to the bone. Horrible sores covered their palms and fingers, and healing took months. Many continued working anyway, their infected hands contaminating the meat they touched. Workers infected with tuberculosis coughed and spat blood onto the floors. Those who stood in unheated rooms all winter developed pneumonia, and those who worked near the grinding machines risked losing fingers, hands, or entire limbs to the relentless blades. Thousands of children worked in Chicago's meatpacking plants at the turn of the century. Some were as young as 10 or 12, though officially the minimum age was 14. They were hired because they were cheap. They earned even less than adult immigrants, and because their small hands were suited to certain tasks. Children trimmed meat, stuffed casings, and worked the canning lines. They stood for 10 to 15 hours a day, often alongside their parents, because a single adult wage was not enough to survive. Many were maimed by the machinery. Others developed chronic illnesses from the chemicals and cold. There was no workers' compensation. If a child was injured, they were simply replaced. The most horrifying stories from Packingtown came from the lard rendering rooms. Massive vats of boiling fat filled these spaces, and workers moved carefully around them. But accidents happened. Men slipped and fell into the scalding vats. Sometimes they were not discovered for hours or even days. By then, there was nothing left to recover. The bones and remains of these workers were not removed from the lard. They were processed along with everything else and shipped out to consumers. As one account described it, when they were fished out, there was never enough left to be worth exhibiting. All but the bones had gone out to the world as pure leaf lard.
There were government inspectors in Packingtown. The public saw them walking through the plants and assumed they were being protected. But the inspectors saw only what the packers wanted them to see. Many were bribed. Others simply looked the other way.
Diseased animals were slaughtered after hours when no inspectors were present. Contaminated meat was processed in back rooms, away from official eyes. The inspection system was a performance, a way to reassure the public while changing nothing. The big meatpacking companies actually supported some federal regulations, knowing that the cost would drive smaller competitors out of business while allowing them to continue their practices unchecked.
In 1906, a young socialist writer named Upton Sinclair published a novel called The Jungle. He had spent 7 weeks undercover in Packingtown, documenting everything he saw. The book was meant to expose the suffering of immigrant workers, but the public was more horrified by what they learned about their food. Readers discovered that their sausages contained rat feces, poisoned bread, spoiled meat, and chemicals. The outcry was immediate and deafening. President Theodore Roosevelt ordered an investigation, and his inspectors confirmed that conditions were even worse than Sinclair described. They found meat shoveled from filthy floors, pushed in rotten carts, and contaminated by diseased workers. The truth could no longer be hidden. On June 30th, 1906, President Roosevelt signed 2 laws that would transform the American food industry forever. The Meat Inspection Act required federal inspection of all meat sold in interstate commerce and mandated sanitary conditions in packing plants. The Pure Food and Drug Act banned the use of dangerous preservatives like borax and formaldehyde and required honest labeling of ingredients. For the first time, the government had the power to protect consumers from the industry's worst practices. The sausages of 1900, filled with filth, chemicals, and secrets, became a relic of a darker age. But the memory of what once went into America's breakfast should never be forgotten. It is a reminder of what happens when profit is allowed to triumph over human life.